It is the policy of the Mesquite Independent School District to maintain a professional business environment and a workplace that is free of all forms of sexual harassment. Principals, teachers, supervisors, and employees who violate this policy are subject to disciplinary action up to and including termination. All employees are responsible for reporting incidents of sexual harassment. MISD does not tolerate reprisal against a person who makes a sexual harassment complaint or witnesses who participate in the same. Unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, or other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature will not be tolerated at school or any other school-related activity. Students shall not engage in conduct that constitutes sexual harassment or sexual abuse, whether by word, gesture, or any other conduct directed toward another person, including a district student, employee, board member, or volunteer. Students found who have violated this rule are subject to disciplinary action. There are 6 types of sexual harassment: quid pro quo, hostile environment, sexual assault, dating violence, domestic violence, and stalking. Quid pro quo happens when a school district employee conditions an educational benefit or service on an individual's participation in unwelcome sexual conduct. A hostile environment is where unwelcome conduct determined by a reasonable person to be so severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive that it effectively denies a person equal access to the institution's educational program or activity. Sexual assault is forcible or non-forcible sexual offenses under the Uniform Crime Reporting System of the FBI. Dating violence is violence done by a person who is or has been in a dating relationship with the other person. Domestic violence is violence by a current or former intimate partner, and stalking is a course of conduct directed at a specific person that would cause a reasonable person to fear for personal safety of self or others, or to suffer emotional distress. Sexual harassment includes, but is not limited to, unwelcome sexual advances, making sexually offensive remarks, requests for sexual favors, other verbal, physical, or visual conduct of a sexual nature. Administrators have specific duties in cases of student-to-student sexual harassment. First, they notify the Assistant Superintendent for Administrative Services for student-to-student claims, or the Director of Personnel Services for claims involving employees first. Then, they conduct an investigation. They always interview the complaining party first. The administrator must be sure to gather all the information available before coming to a conclusion, and then the very last thing to be done is to decide if discipline is warranted. As part of the normal day-to-day classroom discipline management, teachers handle minor problems between students before they escalate to sexual harassment. If a student comes to a teacher claiming sexual harassment, the student must be referred to an administrator in all cases. Some cautions to keep in mind when dealing with student-to-student cases of sexual harassment. Each situation is judged individually. Claims of this type are given priority status. All care will be taken to avoid rushing to a conclusion, and sufficient witnesses will be called. Administrators are called with judging each situation independently. Not all claims of sexual harassment are sexual harassment. The administrator must decide based on many factors, such as the age of the student or the student's ability to reason. Situational factors must be taken into account as well. Administrators should always make sure to interview all witnesses named by the claimant and the defendant. Sexual harassment claims are dealt with on a need-to-know basis. Don't get caught up in the gossip chain, and don't reveal confidential information. Keep thorough documentation. Make sure the documentation is professional, and keep the documentation free of opinions and emotions. In recent years, student-to-teacher sexual harassment has become more of a concern. When students get a crush on a teacher, they may flirt in class. Teachers are professional adults and are responsible for maintaining a professional relationship with students. Students can come forward at any time and claim that the teacher started the flirtation, so it is wise not to encourage the student in any way. There are ways to protect yourself from these types of claims. Set appropriate boundaries with students. Document and notify your supervisor at the first occurrence of inappropriate behavior initiated by students. Avoid all situations that could have the appearance of impropriety, and report inappropriate behavior between students and other staff. These are the situations to avoid at all costs. Discussing inappropriate topics in class as a result of student-initiated questions, engaging in dialogue of sexual topics, discussing any topics in class which are not part of the TEKS for your class, flirting or suggestive talk, listening to, joining in, or soliciting conversation with students about social plans, telling offensive jokes, putting a student on your lap, one-on-one conversations behind closed doors, giving rides home from school or events, any physical touching of any kind, hugging students or rubbing, patting, massaging of any kind, touching a student's clothing or personal items, giving personal gifts, sending notes, letters, or emails of a personal nature, personal phone calls, meeting in a social setting, and inviting students to social events at your home. Teachers and administrators form meaningful relationships with students for the benefit of student learning. These relationships should be professional at all times. Kids don't need another friend. They need a caring adult role model. There are ways to avoid being accused of sexual harassment. Educate yourself. Be sensitive and perceptive when interacting with others. Keep all actions job-related. Avoid personal relationships with students. Touch students only when necessary, and try to never be alone with a student. When harassment by a student of an adult is claimed, administrators must follow a specific procedure. Administrators must notify Child Protective Services within 48 hours if they have reason to suspect abuse. Teachers are classified as professionals and must also contact CPS within 48 hours. Many times when a claim of sexual harassment is made by a student against a teacher, the teacher is placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. This is to protect the student and the employee. Administrators have specific duties in cases of employee-to-student sexual harassment claims. The administrator must notify the Executive Director of Personnel Services. Central office personnel will conduct the investigation. The status of the employee during the investigation will be decided by Personnel Services. With employee-to-employee claims, the administrator must notify the Director of Personnel Services immediately. Central office personnel will conduct the investigation. Complaints that rise above the organizational or school district level can go in a number of different directions, but most go to the Office of Civil Rights. The OCR investigates based on 3 questions. Does your district have a policy? Was the policy communicated? And was the policy followed? The tie between sexual harassment and sexual discrimination is clear. Sexual harassment of a student is covered by the Assistant Superintendent for Administrative Services. Sexual harassment of employees is covered by the Director of Personnel Services. Liability is established for the organization when an appropriate person had actual notice of the abuse and was deliberately indifferent. An appropriate person is an official with the authority to take corrective action to end the discrimination. Anyone in a supervisory capacity can be the appropriate person. The teacher or coach closest to the situation is primarily charged with being vigilant to prevent situations where sexual harassment can occur. This includes monitoring students at all times. It is also extremely important to get information to an administrator so that he or she can take corrective action when needed. Deliberate indifference is when one who has the authority to address the alleged discrimination and to institute corrective measures has actual knowledge of the discrimination and fails to adequately respond. If you do nothing to prevent initial or recurring harassment, then you are creating liability for yourself. If your attempts to prevent sexual harassment are not successful, then it can be interpreted that you are deliberately indifferent. Sometimes patterns in a behavior develop in a way that we may not see that a hostile environment is developing or a quid pro quo situation is emerging. Be on the lookout for these red flags: separate complaints about the same person or group of people, seemingly incorrect gossip that won't go away, and several separate complaints by the same complainant against the same accuser. Annual training sessions with all employees must be conducted. Absentees from those sessions must be trained at an alternate session soon after the original training. Annual training consists of viewing the sexual harassment prevention video. All employees are responsible for documenting their completion of the training. At school campuses, principals will conduct the training sessions. At other work sites, supervisors will conduct the training. All employees will receive an MISD brochure titled Understanding Sexual Harassment. We are all responsible for preventing sexual harassment. Sexual harassment can demoralize us. It can poison a positive work environment, and if substantiated, it can ruin careers and lives. Please take your responsibility seriously and work to prevent sexual harassment.